While there are certainly other cities in the world that can be found on the 45th parallel, none could be quite as interesting as the one locals call Fish City. Located smack dab on the Wisconsin-Michigan border, Marinette, when viewed from the eye of a sightseer, is really quite fascinating. And even if you don't discover the official marker touting its geographic location, I guarantee there's plenty else to see that will wow you when touring the Wisconsin city that sits halfway between the North Pole and the Equator. Hey sightseers, Sightseeing Sally here, and
Marty.
Today we're checking out
Marinette, Wisconsin.
And as you can see, Old Man Winter is knocking at our door.
In full force.
It's a blustery 37 degrees out here. We're going to take you around Marinette and show you some of the cool sights here, share some history, and get you acquainted with the Wisconsin city that's halfway between the North Pole and the Equator.
Let's go check it out.
Over here on Stevenson Island, you'll find Marinette's Historical Museum. Unfortunately, the museum's already closed for the season. But never fear, sightseers, there are some other interesting sights to be found here on the island. Let's go check those out now. Named after Isaac Stevenson, one of the most important men in Marinette's history, the island pays homage to its past, with the Historical Museum marking the site where logs were once sorted, scaled, and sawed. Operating as a city park, visitors can rent the gazebo or view the Soldiers' Memorial, among other things. Here on Stevenson Island, you'll find the Evanchek cabin. Built in 1897, the Evanchek family donated the cabin in 1994 and had it moved here from Porterfield, where it was originally located. At that point, it had been in the family nearly a century. Now it's 126 years old. Pretty amazing when you think about it. Before we move on, I just want to point out the busy highway that you see here is the gateway between Marinette, Wisconsin and Menominee, Michigan, the southernmost city in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. And, if I may add, Marinette's sister city. We visited it last year prior to us leaving for our winter tour. If you haven't seen that episode, you may want to check it out. Off in the distance, you'll notice the two naval ships sitting in the river. For those you don't know, Marinette's home to Marinette Marine, a shipbuilding company that's been around since 1942. Now owned by Fincantieri, they've been commissioned to build these ships for the Navy. Apparently there's some sort of Constellation-class ship involving missiles. Who would have thought that that would be happening here in Marinette, Wisconsin? But it is. Across the river from Stevenson Island is a statue commemorating Isaac Stevenson. Isaac Stevenson was a pioneer, lumberman, and statesman who heavily influenced the beginnings of Marinette. Originally from Canada, Isaac Stevenson started working for his father at the age of 11, serving lumberjacks. He eventually found his way to Marinette and built one of the biggest lumbering operations in the country. This, along with his political achievements, resulted in Isaac becoming one of the most prominent men in all of Marinette's history. Of course, you can't come to the city on the 45th parallel without mentioning the woman after whom the city and county were named. The granddaughter of a Menominee Indian chief, Queen Marinette, as she was known, was a skilled fur trader who advised the local tribe on how to deal with white settlers, lumber companies, and the U.S. government. Known for her charity work with the sick and poor, the officials named the city and county after her. And apparently back in the years of 1846 through 1895, her home and trading post once stood about 60 feet south of here, which, according to my calculations, puts us here in this spot. As it just so happens, you can find several of these geographical markers throughout Marinette County, indicating where the halfway point is between the North Pole and the Equator. This particular marker happens to be on Highway 141, just outside Beaver. Over here on Hattie Street, you can find the old train depot. Constructed in 1903 by the Chicago, Milwaukee, and St. Paul Railroad, this depot replaced an earlier depot that dated back to the early 1880s. Known as a combination station, the Marinette Depot was constructed to provide shelter for passengers, freight, and train control under a single roof. Now on the National Register of Historic Places, the depot was moved from its original location to avoid demolition. And interestingly enough, the train depot now is for sale, which means you could own an iconic piece of Marinette history. You can't tell from looking through the windows with the camera, but they have hardwood floors in there and they look beautiful. This would be a really neat site to perhaps open up a restaurant or maybe put in an Airbnb. That'd be a lot of potential here. Rail fans will be interested to know that there is more than one train depot here in Marinette. In order to find the second train depot, you need to head over to the block on Hall Avenue in between Hattie and Madison Ave. There you'll find a set of train tracks that run between Hardee's and Quick Trip. And sandwiched in between, you'll find the old depot overlooking the tracks. The Chicago and Northwestern Railroad arrived in Marinette on December 29th, 1871. From here, it went north, arriving in Escanaba the following December. Escanaba, you say? Weren't we just there?
Yes, if you haven't seen that episode, you're going to want to check that out too.
The old train depots aren't the only buildings with history in Marinette. There's also several buildings on the National Register of Historic Places in the downtown. Marty's checking out one of my favorite buildings here in Marinette, known as the Dunlap Square building. This building was actually built in two phases. The first one's being started in 1890, and the second one being finished in 1902. What do you think of it, Marty?
Reminds me of a castle. Reminds me of the Excalibur in Las Vegas for some reason.
If you use your imagination, you can get where he's coming from. Me personally, I picture Rapunzel up in the higher part of the turret, getting ready to let down her golden hair. As far as why it was built the way it was, I don't know. I tried looking up its history online to see if there'd be any information on it. I did find out that at one time there was a saloon here, and it was very profitable up until the point that it was made to change over to selling soda during Prohibition. But when Prohibition ended, they went back to selling alcohol, and it was a local favorite for many years. If you go over to what I believe is the southwest corner of the building, you'll find a store called the Goose and Gander Finery. It's a neat little shop or boutique that sells women's clothing and gifty items. And then, if I'm not mistaken, there might be a few offices inside, but other than that, there really isn't a whole lot being done with the building currently. It appears that the section where the saloon once stood may now be available for lease. There you go, Marty, a new business venture. Open up your own saloon.
Yeah, deal with drunks. You know how my attitude is. I wouldn't be in business very long. I wouldn't have any customers.
On second thought, you're right.
Back to my favorite, all the carving and the limestone in that old bank. The original part of the bank. It's still the same bank at the top, still Stevenson National Bank. It's got to be 100 years old or more.
Another iconic building in the downtown is the Lowerman Building. The Lowerman Building is such an imposing building, it doesn't matter where you stand. it takes up space. This one also happens to be one of my favorites. I love to shop in the store, Simply Charming, and the building itself is really neat. If I'm not mistaken, Isaac Stevenson provided funds to help build it, and at one time this, Lowerman's, was considered the largest department store north of Milwaukee. And then you've got this other building here. This one also was built by the Lowerman brothers. I thought I had read that they had used it as their warehouse, and if I'm not mistaken, it's now being used, or at least a part of it's being used, for apartments. You'll notice as we walk around this part of the downtown that the main street kind of zigzags around. For newbies, it's kind of disorienting and you can almost get lost back here. The other thing I want to point out is over on the far corner here where you see that opening, there used to stand a hotel. I believe it was called Hotel Marinette, and the street itself was made out of brick pavers, much like what you see here on the sidewalk. We're now a block down over at the corner of Main and Wisconsin Street. And over here you can get a better feel for the crooked nature of Main Street and its side streets. See what I mean about possibly getting lost back here? The crooked nature of Main Street dates back to Marinette's early days when apparently there were two settlements along the river here, areas where businesses had sprung up near sawmills, and because people wanted to get between the two settlements, of course they built a road, and that road just kind of meandered along with the river. That second settlement is pretty neat to see. It's like its own little main street by itself. We'll head over there here in a little bit. But first I wanted to take a moment to point out some of the businesses that are tucked away in these historic buildings, beginning with the Cafe Green, a specialty salad and sandwich shop. The building it's in is known as the F.R. Skibitsky Building, built about 1904. And then you've got Jordan Cole Jewelers, which is in the old First National Bank building. Main Street Antique Mall, which is in the old Globe building. And the Pillow Top Mattress Factory in the Masonic Temple building. From the looks of it, it appears this chapter is still active. By the way, if you ever get the chance, I recommend stopping at the Antique Mall here in Marinette. Even if you're not interested in buying any antiques, there still is a lot of neat things to be seen inside. Of course, I would be remiss if I failed to point out Marty's favorite spot in all of Marinette, the St. Vincent de Paul thrift store. And I'll give you sightseers one guess as to where he is right now. I don't know if you realize this, sightseers, but for a city with only a population of, just around 12,000, might be a little bit less, there's a lot going on here. You've got the whole commercial district over on the other side of town, near where Mickey Lou's is, that I haven't even showed you. This is where Shopko used to be, and where the other big name retailers are. And don't get me started on all the places you can go for a drink. Here's something about Marinette I bet you didn't know. But before we go any further, I have a couple of quick shout outs to give. First, I'd like to give a special shout out of thanks to John for his generosity in tipping our trip jar. Next, I'd like to say welcome and thanks to Pamela and Pearl for becoming our latest patrons here on Patreon. And then last but not least, I'd like to give a special shout out to all of you who've become members of Sightseeing Sidekicks here on YouTube. There's 5 of you, so bear with me. I've got Dwayne Logan, August Harder, Doug and Pam, Tiffany Jack, and Tapioca. Thanks to all of you, we're able to get out and film some really fantastic places, both here in Wisconsin and across America. By the way, for only $2.99 a month, that's less than a Starbucks coffee, you too can enjoy the perks of becoming a Sightseeing Sidekick. All you have to do is head on over to our memberships tab and follow the instructions. Now, back to exploring Marinette. John Hubley, creator of Mr. Magoo, is originally from here. For those of you who don't know, Mr. Magoo was a cartoon character voiced in by actor Jim Backus, who played Thurston Howell on one of my favorite TV shows, Gilligan's Island. And apparently John Hubley, who was an artist, got a start in Disney, but then in 1952 he was fired from the UPA and blacklisted from Hollywood, all because he refused to cooperate with the House Committee on Un-American Activities. John didn't let that little setback interfere with his dreams. He and his wife Faith ended up opening up their own studio, which later led to them winning an Academy Award for Best Animated Short Film for their film Moonbird. And what was significant about that was that that was the very first time an independent film had won the award. In any case, John Hubley fans will find a tribute to him standing outside the main entrance of the Stevenson Public Library here in Marinette. Speaking of the library, did you know that the original building is made of Bedford stone and was a $30,000 gift from Isaac Stevenson? That's right, and later when they added on, as you can see, they used matching stone. This library is pretty impressive as far as small city libraries go. I thought we'd go on in just so you could get a glimpse of what the inside looks like. Especially the original part of the library is pretty phenomenal. As you can see, they have some cozy nooks for people to sit and read. They also have a historic collection of photos of the city on display here. Unfortunately, there's a glare coming from the glass and the lighting that makes it difficult for you to see them clearly through my camera. And then if you look up in the middle, you can see the stained glass that's in the center. I don't know about you, but I just love old libraries. If I lived here in Marinette, I'd be coming here all the time. I should probably get going though, before I get kicked out for disturbing the peace here in the library. That's one thing that's never happened before, and I certainly don't want to be adding it to my list of firsts. If you continue down past the library along Riverside Avenue, you head to the section, the neighborhood where all the early lumber barons and other well-to-do individuals first settled in Marinette. Originally part of Main Street, this would have been where Isaac Stevenson and his family, the Lowermans, the Carneys, would have all built their mansions. For instance, this house here on the corner was built by William S. Baker. He married Sarah J. Stevenson, half-sister of Isaac Stevenson, and he worked as a bookkeeper for many years and later had his own insurance business where he prospered for over 50 years before his death in 1928. These next two houses were commissioned by Isaac Stevenson to be built as wedding gifts for his two eldest daughters. Can you imagine that? Getting a house as a wedding gift from your father? It may be hard to fathom, but that's the kind of money Isaac Stevenson had. I think it's important to note that his two son-in-laws weren't exactly no good doers or idlers. The one that lived in the greenhouse actually had a very distinguished military career with the local National Guard, and the one that lived over here worked his way up from cashier all the way up to president of Stevenson National Bank. This house, by the way, happens to be on the National Register of Historic Places. Although Isaac Stevenson once inhabited this street as well, you won't be able to visit his home these days. And that's because Pioneer Presbyterian Church now sits where his home once was. If you thought those other houses were impressive, check out the one that was built for Joseph and Cecilia Lowerman. Built in 1910, the house is now an inn and restaurant. Joseph, by the way, was only 23 when he came to Marinette and opened his store on Main Street. What Joseph started as a small general store, serving the booming logging industry, quickly developed into something much bigger, the Larman department store. Within 2 years, the Larmans were opening their flagship store in Dunlap Square. Deemed a huge success, it paved the way to 12 more of these stores in the Midwest. We're going to move on. There's a lot more of Marinette to see, besides the affluent neighborhood of Isaac Stevenson's inner circle. Here's something that's right up Marty's alley, a pair of cannons. Marty's gonna go walk over and check them out a little bit closer. I can tell you that they were presented to the library in 1914 by Senator Isaac Stevenson. Remember, he's had a lot of influence here in Marinette. For some reason, though, they ended up over here along the river, but nobody seems to remember why. Well, let's see what Morty's got to say about them, because he's been looking at them pretty closely.
I can't make it out, but it says Springfield, Massachusetts on this one where it was made. And the date stamped on it is 1846. Let's go see what the other one says.
What do you make of them, Marty?
I want one, but I couldn't afford these. I'll have to stick with the little ones I have.
Yep.
This one says C.A. and Company, Boston. And on this side it's stamped, it's upside down, 1854. They're pretty old, both of these, really old.
Well, if you didn't know, that's because they were presented to the library in 1914 by Isaac Stevenson. So yeah, they would be old. I imagine he got them from somewhere.
Some Army surplus sale.
No, probably not that, but
Pretty neat.
they are legit, I would say, wouldn't you say?
I believe so, by the dates on it, what's stamped on them. I assume that the dates and everything and the labeling on this is upside down because they put these here upside down because the wick hole is under here. You can't see it, but it's right here. It's probably to keep people from sticking wicks in them and loading them up and firing them.
Yeah, it's the last thing that they need is somebody to go rogue with a pair of cannons here in Marinette. Head over to the business district on US 41 and you'll find this iconic Marinette restaurant. Known as Mickey Lou's, this little hole-in-the-wall burger joint's been serving up charcoal broiled sandwiches since the 1940s. Those of you who've been following me for a while know that this is my all-time favorite place to grab a burger. This is a Mickey Lou's, and I'm telling you, it's the best burger ever. Unfortunately for me, today happens to be a Monday, the only day of the week that they're closed. Wah, wah, wah. Guess that means I'll just have to come back another time. If Mickey Lou's isn't your thing, you could always head over to Ironworks on Main. Located on the corner of Main and Oddfellow Street, this type of grill occupies the same space that Marinette's International Order of Oddfellows once did. And while I have never personally eaten here, I can tell you that on Google reviews, this place is rated 4 stars out of 5. And given its history, I'd say coming here is well worth it. We're now over on the corner of Hosmer and Ogden. This is the area, the second area where Marinette saw growth back in the 1800s. You can tell we're close to the bay by all the boats that have been dry docked for the winter. In fact, the BP is called the waterfront store because, as you might have guessed, it's right on the water. This area may look familiar to some of you sightseers because if you watched my Menominee video, you'll know we ended up here at some point. But this is where the commercial fishing industry took hold and where the second little main street that I was telling you about exists. A little rough around the edges, I know. However, it still played a role in the history of the city that's halfway between the North Pole and the Equator, and shouldn't be forgotten. Now here's something I wasn't expecting to run across. Care to guess what it is? If you've been with me a while, you know my obsession with these. What do you think the chances are that the phone is still there? Should we place the odds at 5 to 1? Can I get a drum roll, please? Alright, enough goofing around. The answer we've all been waiting for is... Wah, wah, wah. No telephone, but a nasty old milk jug. Before we go, I got one last thing to share with you about the Wisconsin city that's halfway between the North Pole and the Equator. And that is, sometimes in the dead of winter, it actually feels like you're in the North Pole. Until next time, this is Sightseeing Sally.